Hello, everybody. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here in the Calvin Coolidge Museum at Forbes Library. This is a nice big crowd. We are so glad to see you all. We are here in person, and we are also live streaming on the Forbes Library YouTube channel. So if any of you are watching from home, hello. You may also be watching from the community room in our library because we have some overflow space there. So if you are here standing and would like to sit and watch along, please do feel free to either grab one of the few chairs in the back or head down to the community room where we are watching all of this with about a 5-second delay. It's going to be the same great program. A few notes to keep in mind for those of you here. We should have our sound system up and hopefully in a setting that you all can hear, but if you do need assistive listening devices that dial into our sound system, please come find me. I will be sat somewhere in the back corner, or give me a wave and we can get you set up with one of those. If you are watching from home, you should be able to turn on captions on the video. I wish I could help you in real time. If you are here in the room and you would like a restroom or a water fountain, there are a few options in the building. There are available restrooms on the ground floor of our building. So take the elevator down or the stairs to the ground floor, head toward the fiction area. If you need a water fountain, there is one available in the children's department. We are doing some bathroom renovations and we do appreciate your cooperation. We will be doing a Q&A toward the end of the discussion today, so if you have a question, please put it in your pocket until then. I will be the microphone bearer for the Q&A, so if you would like to say something, please hang on to it until I run over to you with this, and please try to keep your remarks to about a minute or less if possible, so we can get to as many questions as we can. With that, I will pass it on to the doctors and Fran to take us on this really interesting and important discussion. Thank you.
As I was walking here with my wife this evening, she explained that the competition was the community spelling bee. And so I wondered, just who are these strange people that will forego the community spelling bee to to talk about end-of-life stuff, dementia, dying well, whatever that means, and so on. But here you are. We have an hour and a half. We have till 8 o'clock, and we will end promptly at that time. Priya is very good about setting such limits. I wanted you to know, since those of you who've read about this thing or heard about this thing, Jeff Zessiger is obviously at the end there. We're going to introduce ourselves. Fran Volkman is... Yeah. This evening's special invited guest. Why, you will learn in due time. But let me start by saying I am Lou Cohen. I am a emeritus professor of psychiatry at Tufts Medical School and UMass Medical School, and I practiced at Bay State for some 35 plus years. Much of what I enjoyed there related to end-of-life issues and writing. And the reason that we are this evening have been brought together has to do with Winter's End, which is the latest book that I completed that Oxford University Press put out, Dementia and Dying Well. So it will come up. I will do a brief reading from it, maybe a couple readings, but I will keep it brief, mainly because the people that are sitting behind the microphones here, and you all, have some things to say that I think our community would benefit by hearing. That's as much as I wanted to say about myself. Fran, you want to say a few words about yours?
I'm here because it allows me to talk about Joan Sanadella, who is my partner for 30 years and who ended her life by voluntarily stopping eating and drinking in response to a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. So it's a journey that is hard, but I I want to share it with you, and I want you to talk back.
And I'm Jeff Zessiger, physician in town here for the last 40 or so years. Most recently, I've been working at the Hospice of the Fisher Home in Amherst, and I've done hospice work for 25 or so years, palliative care work for 20 or so. As I look in the audience, I see people in healthcare that I know. I'm sure there's a few others I don't. I'd be interested just to find out with a show of hands how many people are medical related in the room. So that's a good number. I'd say almost half. I see a few young people in the room. Thank you for coming. I still feel young. It's interesting how no matter what age you are, you can feel young. But then things start to pop up, and books like Lose and work in hospice, getting to know what this VSED is, have all been a journey, and it's taken many years to get comfortable and understand it and then be able to talk to people about it. But it's something I've become very passionate about.
One of my mentors, when discussing a good death, and again, the subtitle of this book has to do with dying well, but that person said, a good death is the kind of death you would have if you had a choice. And indeed, choice is something that we are going to be hearing a lot of. Let me begin with just a bit about Chapter 1 here, and then we're going to kick it around among the three of us, and then we're going to take plenty of time to hear from you all. Are there really fates worse than death? Like most people, Dan Winter was uncertain. That is, until he visited his father at a memory care unit in Lawrence, Kansas. Dan's father had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease at the age of 70. Alan Winter Sr. survived for 13 years, spending his final days in 2013 at a specialized chronic care facility. Dan remembers sitting silently beside him. His dad, who had once exuberantly embraced life, was unable to speak, understand the simplest words, or make eye contact. He couldn't respond to his name. He was incontinent of bowel and bladder. Wint, like many patients in the final stages of dementia, had even tragically lost the ability to smile. Dan felt demoralized that his father's formerly agile mind had wound completely down. There was not the slightest whiff of his silly humor, constant state of motion, sometimes irritating logic or obsession with the Kansas Jayhawks basketball team. Gone were the man's ambitions, yearnings, and capacity to love. To Dan, it seemed that the disease had stripped his dad not only of individuality and personhood, but of his essential humanity.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you just turn the mic down towards your mouth? Because when you're reading in here, we lose your voice.
Thank you. Okay, hopefully this will do it. I'm sorry I lost a few paragraphs in there, but to recap, Dan Winter went to a nursing facility to see his father, unfortunately, in the last stages of dementia. Wint, the father, had been a successful entrepreneur, banker, and cattle rancher. He had faithfully served in the Kansas Senate, where he was known to be articulate, popular, but also sometimes harshly opinionated. Okay. Even more so. Okay. At the nursing facility, Dan looked at the withered man lying in bed and concluded there was no him. It was lights out. Let us move from there. What does this evoke for you guys?
Great sadness. How many people in the audience know somebody with dementia? That's why you're here, obviously, but thank you for sharing that. It's a powerful illness. It's a long illness, and people that know it have lived it more than I have. but I do have a father who didn't have Alzheimer's, but had many accidents, falling off horseback, bicycle, and it basically gave him a dementia of sorts. He didn't get to a point of deciding if he wanted to live longer or not. He was a very, as Lou often says, a very happy person, just content to eat and drink and get visitors once in a while. But I saw how long it was that he was slowly declining. The good side I found was I got some time at the end of his life to actually care for him before he died, and it was some of the closest time I ever had with him. So this is some of the quandary we're going to hear tonight. If you're diagnosed with Alzheimer's, do you decide you want to die earlier or to live longer? You have to put up with a lot. Will you gain enough to make it worth your while?
Fran, you want to say a few words?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll just hold this damn thing. That's better, isn't it? So, one of the things that seems like it really needs to change to me is how Alzheimer's or dementias in general still seem to be a source of shame. A thing that people don't talk about. Keep it closer. And that would be one of the things I would most hope could change. Joan was very clear that this was a disease, and she talked about it. She was one of the few people I have ever known who talked about it. And when you can't talk about something, it's very hard to try to find some way for yourself. But that's where we started. And some of you knew Joan, and she talked about everything. And well, I might add. So that's what happened when she finally got the diagnosis. The other thing I think I'd like to say at the beginning is that it's surrounded by denial. Joan was first told that she had mild cognitive impairment. And she said, "Franny, I think I'm going to lose my mind." And I said, no. I meant it. I was totally in denial. You know, MCI, everybody has that when they get our age. Not a problem. Don't worry about it. She was worried way before I was. So I guess it's partly the denial, partly must stem from the fact that it's awful. You don't want it to happen to the people you love because it is so awful. And you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know whether it will go fast or slow, or whether somebody will, as Lou says in his book, adopt a sort of Zen-like posture, or whether it will be horrible. And so maybe you just hope that it's not true. So that's kind of where we started, and the journey goes from there.
You know, and the same denial that you're talking about goes for under some different names, but goes for a lot of people who have dementia. That they go into this illness not recognizing the impairment that they have, not able, not prepared to accept it. And this happens with a lot of neurological diseases. One of the classic things is someone who's had a stroke and is paralyzed on one side. You see them in the medical office, and they say they're perfectly fine. You, the physician, may say to them, well, pick up your right hand and show me that you can move it. And they respond, I could, but I don't want to now. And dementia, for many people, seems to be like that as well. That is, call it a protective function of the brain. And I think it's the rare folk with the disease who are able to acknowledge it and accept it from the beginning. And your partner was one of those rare people. Yeah.
And I think to give it a name, the name I would give this is fear. You can be afraid of a surgery, you can be afraid of short of breath, you can be afraid of a lot of things. Losing your mind is a pretty big fear. And I think that's why everybody acts the way they do.
What I think is also very common, though, is the experience of visiting someone who has a dementing illness and walking out of there, particularly if they're in a nursing facility, walking out of there and saying, if this ever is going to happen to me, kill me now. I don't want any part of it. Now, how serious is such a statement? I'd say in most cases not terribly serious, but is the sentiment a common one and a true one? Yeah, I think it's there. It certainly was for me, and it certainly prompted me to want to know who are the people who actually will act or want to act on such a sentiment when they are diagnosed and begin to recognize that they have such a disease.
And I would say there are many ways, if you decide an illness is too much for you, to approach that. And there are violent ways to do it. I've met patients that just shocked me. I remember one gentleman in Seattle who we got him much better in the hospice facility. He went home, and the next day I heard he had shot himself, and he was dead. That really hit everybody who had just taken care of him and really cared about him. And he looked fine. He seemed fine. And we hear many times about, gee, is somebody wanting to, commit suicide, whatever way you want to say that. And I would call that very impulsive. This gentleman that I mentioned was. But what we're talking about tonight is more rational, more thinking, talking, sharing. What are your goals? What's important to you? What is a quality of life? What is your quality of life? And everybody has a different definition. And I didn't get to meet Joan, but I'm glad I've met Fran. And from everything I hear, she was smart. She was the kind of person who wanted to figure it out. You want to say more about that?
Yeah, sure. She was smart. And
A little closer.
she was also an avid reader and writer. And she said almost from the get-go, Franny, I don't want to go down this road. I can't bear the thought of losing myself. She was a big reader of Virginia Woolf, among others. And Woolf writes about that. Who am I without myself? And that's what Joan felt. I can't go on without myself. And so we started trying to do research. What can she do? What is available to us? And it was not easy. I was on the web right from the get-go. I went to the Alzheimer's Association. I went to the CDC. I went to the national, whatever. Nobody ever mentioned BSED. Nobody mentioned much of anything. I mean, they just kept saying, well, you might be able to keep your loved one at home. And then you find out what that might entail. And Joan said, I can't put you through that. And I said, no, it's not about me. We'll keep you at home. It'll be fine. No, it won't, she said. And then, so the next option is, well, how about long-term care? even the good places, and there are some good places around here, they're not the kind of thing Joan wanted to do. And they're not the kind of thing I wanted to do with her. I couldn't bear the idea of having her suffer. And so we kept kind of rejecting one thing after another. And then we thought, Switzerland. We can go to Switzerland. You know, she said, why would I go to Switzerland? I want to die right here at home in my own house. So then somebody came to the door and they said, we can get you fentanyl. And Joan said, oh, good God, no. You know, why would I do that? That's against the law. Can you imagine this? That's against the law, she says. So then we started collecting. Joan had lots of other things wrong with her, so we had lots of high-powered pills in the house. So I started collecting those, and then a physician friend of ours said, you better know what you're doing if you do that.
Let me jump in, if I can, because I'm one of those physicians who, as a psychiatrist working at Bay State Medical Center, I probably saw several thousands of people who took overdoses. And I saw them because the overdoses didn't kill them. So that indeed we can acquire a lot of medications to that end, but they don't necessarily do the trick if that's what we really intend for them. Let me tell you a little bit more about Dan Winter, because he himself did what Franny was suggesting, which is acquire a fair number of medications, a lethal amount of medications. He approached some right-to-die advocates who had experience with medications, and so he probably had the proper amount and knew the order in which to take them and the like. He didn't end up doing it like Joan. He also ended up doing VSED, but I'll get to that. But first, sort of telling you, how do people with dementia die? And the answer is you go look through the literature and you can't, in fact, find numbers to support how people die. It's just one of those subjects that the medical establishment kind of turns a blind eye to. But a fair number of them, as Franny is suggesting, are folk who descend into their dementia and who end up in a nursing facility. And eventually, in the final stages of dementia, they forget how to eat. They forget how to drink. And the medical folk used to drop tubes, as we would say, and feed them artificially. We're less inclined to do that nowadays. And people, in a certain way, will just dehydrate themselves and they will die that way, which is, by the way, the mechanism in VSED in which people die. You don't starve to death. You simply do not have enough fluids to keep your body organs going. But that is one way in which probably most folk who have these illnesses currently die. Other ways, Jeff mentioned suicide attempts, and in fact, shooting oneself is the most common way that people do. Dan Winter totally rejected the idea of such a violent type of death. What else? People have accidents. They wander, get hit by a car. People complete, if they have their wits about them right from the start and have some clear wishes as to what they want, they complete advanced directives. And I want to turn to Jeff to maybe speak to that a bit.
Certainly, and we have an expert on advanced directives in the back of the room. I'm not going to look at who that is, but the state of Massachusetts is currently revising the way they do it. We have had a MOLST form here in Massachusetts for many years. How many people have filled out a MOLST form? And the companion question, how many people have a healthcare proxy? Whew. So Of the two, the healthcare proxy is the most important because that person can think and act and speak for you. The MOLST form has been useful because it gives doctors an idea in an emergency, particularly if your healthcare proxy isn't around and you can't say what you want. That gives you an idea what to start with in the emergency room. Massachusetts is moving to a 3-tier system, which is mostly like the rest of the country. I'd like to have every kind of intervention possible to try to get well. The middle path is, well, I'll take some of them, maybe for a time-limited process. And the bottom tier is, I just like to have comfort. I'd rather not go to your hospital. My mom was like that. She said, you've done it all. Thank you. You did a good job. I don't want to go anymore. And we honored that, and that was very validating. So that's sort of what advanced directive orders you can do in Massachusetts. Besides that, you can do unofficial ones that aren't exactly legal, but they do have, some standing. You can do a 5 wishes. You can put a document together yourself to say, I would want this. Here's a scenario I would like to avoid. And then the key thing is making sure other people in your family or your friends, whoever your support group is, understands that. If they don't, they'll look at this piece of paper in the emergency room and go, oh my God, this seems horrible what they're asking me to support for my loved one. So it's very important to have these conversations.
Now, I interviewed Dan Winter and his husband over a 9-month period. I identified him, by the way. He gave a webinar, in which he spoke in behalf of a new dementia directive that had come out. And I kind of figured there was more to this man and what he was going through than what he said in this webinar. And when I spoke to him, he was very upfront from really the first 5 minutes that he intended to end his life. I want to give you a little further taste of Dan and why he, I think, was willing to talk to me, wanted to talk to me, wanted to put out there that he hoped conversations would go on in different communities, not necessarily espousing VSED or any particular way to die, but just for people to start talking about this otherwise taboo subject. So he described his upbringing to me as one of 5 siblings raised in a small town situated between Lawrence and Kansas City. When he was 10 years old and his dad was running for the state senate in Kansas as a moderate Republican, he learned Martin Luther King had been assassinated. The following morning, the entire family's attention was riveted by television coverage. Dan remembered his mother objecting to the children being present, and his father saying, "Of course they need to watch." Later, his mom and dad called all the kids out to the backyard flagpole where they had a little ceremony in honor of MLK. First, they raised the flag, and then they silently lowered it to half-staff. That night, Dan said, I looked out the window of my bedroom, and it appeared as if the house was ablaze. I woke everyone up. The fire department and the police were summoned, and they quickly arrived with sirens howling, only to discover that somebody had tried to burn a cross in the yard. After everyone departed, the family would later find a note left in their mailbox by the perpetrator. It read, "Wint, I nearly shit my skivvies when I saw that you lowered your flag to half-mast after they killed that," fill in the blank word. "Jesus," Dan exclaimed to me, "this is a tranquil, diminutive town of 10,000 people. A big bell went off in my brain." Dan's epiphany was, maybe there's a place for me to try to change all of that. And I think that this was a piece of why he, over a 9-month period until his death, kept talking to me, and kept talking to me in the face of the suffering that he was undergoing and the pushback that he got from his extended family about his plan to foreshorten his life. Fran, you want to talk about how Joan came to decide when she was going to do the same?
Sure. Joan and Dan were a little bit alike in that they were both people with agency. And Lou talks about this in some detail in the book. Dan was the head of the ACLU in Kansas, isn't that right?
Absolutely.
I mean, he was for choice in all kinds of ways, and Joan was too. And like what Lou just said, it wasn't that we ever came to the point of advocating for VSED. We advocated for choice and for people to know what all their options were, because it was so hard for us to ever even discover VSED. It wasn't out there. I don't know how I finally even found out about it. But I do want to say that when I found, I'll speak for myself, when I found out about VSED, I thought it sounded absolutely horrible. I thought, how could anybody ever do such a thing to themselves? You don't want to do that. And so we kept looking and looking and looking for all these other options that we've kind of already talked about. And the farther into it we got, the better VSED began to look. One of our friends at Lathrop talked to us about being on the outside versus the inside of a situation. When you start these things, and it applies to so many situations, when you start, you're on the outside. You don't know really much of anything. And so these things like VSED just sound awful. But after you've gone down this road and you've looked at what are the options for care, what is this likely to be like for this person you love, then you come back and say, well, maybe it's time to rethink this, and which is exactly what happened to us.
And can you speak to what happened at Lathrop?
Okay, let me say now. So finally, Joan made the decision. You know, it has to be the patient's own decision. Nobody else can make it. So Joan said, "I'm doing this, Fran," and I said, "Oh my God, I need help. We need help." And so we put together what we called our core group. Some people would use family members, but we had a core group of 4 people, plus a wonderful woman who was a healthcare person in the community named Allison Sinkler. And then I held my breath and said, we have to talk to our doctor, and we have to talk to hospice. And from my reading, I already knew that they might say no, because they often do. And so we worked up our courage first and went to the Fisher home and sat in the yard and talked to Kemper Carlson. And Joan was just like totally there. And she said, "This is what I want to do. Will you help me?" And Kemper said, "Yes, we'll help you." And I also want to just say, I don't want to talk too much, but I want to say what help means. People have said to me, "How could you help her die?" And the fact is, we didn't help her die. Everything that hospice did, everything that I did, everything that the doctor did was palliative. She died all by herself. We helped her to make that death a peaceful, gentle, dignified death. There's a big difference. So then we went to our doctor, and he said, "Yes, I'll help you. I'll come to your house." And so suddenly here in this wonderful town, we got all this support. it was kind of overwhelming. And then people at Lathrop who knew us, of course. We'd lived there for 8 years. A few people didn't get near it, but one of our neighbors emptied his house and said, "You can come here to eat and drink, you guys, you core group people." Susan, can I tell him you were there? Susan was there from hospice. She was amazing. So we went down to Jeff's house, and the community started bringing the food. We had these delicious breakfasts and big bowls of fruit and yogurt and, oh my God, all this stuff, and lunches and lunches. And then a friend of my son Tom's, who became all of our friends, Ann Hinckley, brought all the dinners for us. And then our Lathrop community people set up a vigil in the meeting house every evening. For half an hour, people just came there and sat in silence. Sorry, I'm still just overwhelmed with how everything went so right, you know. And Joan was delighted. Joan knew what was going on. I have to say one more thing, that Dr. Elsie came when she was getting pretty far into her VSED, and she was mostly sleeping, and he sat down beside the bed, and she opened her eyes, and he said, "Joan, do you still know why you're doing this?" And she looked at him and she said, "It sure beats the alternative."
So it's an interesting part of your story, Fran, that you had to do a search of your own to figure this out, and by being persistent, you were able to put the pieces together. It's amazing to me because 10 years before that, and some people in the audience probably remember Eleanor Waken. I'm sorry, it's another person. That was an interesting slip. Lee Hawkins. And Lee was the same person with agency and determination, and she said, "I had enough. It's time. I'm going to stop eating and drinking," and her family supported her. But she was in Lathrop, and yet the community memory of that had already gone into the vapors. If you don't know who to talk to, if you don't know what the connection is, you won't get into the stream that'll help you through this. So these community talks are essential, and it even calls to my mind for something more, some kind of service that's out there that says, what are your options? And have that available as a source of information for our community and maybe the whole area.
And you know Lori Loisel, many of you, I'm sure, who wrote a book about Lee Hawkins. I didn't even know about the book. You know, it was not out there.
What more do you want to talk about?
I think it's important to mention, here we are in the state of Massachusetts. We've had referendums. We've had the legislature working on medical aid in dying. It just didn't happen again this last, legislative session. There's some people that really don't want it to pass, and even if the majority of people, 70+% of people in polls in Mass say it should be an option to be able to take medications to die. But even if that had passed, most of you in the room probably already know, if you have dementia, you're not in the last 6 months of life, you wouldn't be able to qualify for medical aid in dying. There are other countries, and Lou knows more about this than I do, where it is possible. In Canada to the north, definitely they're much more advanced in this. But with medical aid in dying not available, I see voluntarily stopping eating and drinking as a powerful force under your own control, totally legal in 50 states, can be very comfortable, and almost everybody I've seen go through it, they say, my mouth's dry, I'm tired, let me take a nap. And if you just swab somebody's mouth, you keep supporting them, changing their position in bed. If they have stiffness and soreness in bed, give them a pain medicine. If they're nervous about what they're going through or the loss of the connection with their loved ones, give them something for anxiety. Very few people go down a path that's very difficult for them, and they would become agitated, but there's plenty of medicine for that too. So your initial impression, V said, would be too painful and or too long. It kind of surprises me because it's about maybe 7 days of being alert, and then the next 5 to 7 days of being more asleep than anything, and you're comfortable. You just need good support, and if something surprising happens, that's when you want to have good hospice support.
And what happened with Joan?
Joan had wonderful support from everybody. The core group was there all the time. We took little turns, and somebody was always either in the room or sitting at the door, so that if she tried to get up, my son Tom took it upon himself to never let her fall down. So there was all of that. But Joan was, and we had hospice brought all kinds of stuff for us, mouth swabs, and we had drops for her eyes. We had everything. We had creams, and she was pretty comfortable. And she said to me, in fact, a couple of days in, she said, Franny, this isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. There was one time at night when she was breathing awfully loudly, and it scared me, and I called hospice, and they answered right away. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and they said, put the phone up here and let me hear her. And then they said, oh, Fran, this is absolutely normal. She doesn't have any sense of that. Everything is fine. But if you get really worried, we'll come,
Yeah, Dan, at one point, had a conversation with John, his husband, where the subject of gin and tonic came up. Apparently a favorite drink of the man. And so John asked Dan whether he would like to have a final gin and tonic, and made one for him. Dan took a mouthful, swished it around, and spit it out. And I mentioned this in part, and I'll turn to you again, Franny, for it, but one of the things from a physician standpoint that is meaningful is how resolute people are when they embark on something like V said, how they stick with it. And again, I'm speaking about Joan's story as well.
Oh, absolutely. It was one of the things in the book that made me think that Joan and Dan were rather alike. They were both just determined. They never faltered, either one of them, did they? I mean, Joan certainly never did. Once she made that choice, that was it. And by the way, she too liked gin.
How do you follow up that comment?
Give it a try.
Well, I will. I recently took care of a gentleman over at the Fisher Home, and he and his family were really in sync about him stopping eating and drinking. He was in early dementia. He didn't want to go further into it. His first night at the house, they went out to the movies at Amherst Cinema, and he came back and said, terrific movie. And he may not have been able to tell me all the details, but he just had a wonderful time. A couple days later, he said to the nurse, I think I'd like something to drink. And the nurse said, well, do you remember why you're here? And he went, "Oh, yeah, never mind." So it didn't take twisting his arm, it just took a reminder. And I've seen that with other people. If they wanted to take a sip, they could. It wouldn't derail the whole process. But they know it's going to make it longer, and they usually say, "Nah, I don't think so. Thanks anyway."
One of our core group members had Joan record her own voice on the cell phone, talking to herself, so that if she was ever decided she wanted to eat or drink during her VSED, we could play this back to her in her own voice. It never had to happen. It never happened. She did ask me once for chocolate ice cream, and I said, "Joan, I can bring it if you really want it, but it means it will delay what you're doing." She said, "Oh, damn," and turned her head away. It was the same kind of thing. Yeah.
Joan died when?
The early morning of the 10th day. You mean, is that what you mean?
That's fine. Yeah. And when was that?
That was February 2nd, 2023.
Okay. So you've had some time now to digest, absorb what happened, and I'm curious what your own, how you feel at this point.
Yeah, and again, I think others have shared this. Your friend Judith. Joan and I both did a lot of grieving while she was still here. That was hard. But she was also so clear, and I said to her once, we were just sitting on the couch, and I said, "I don't know how I'm going to go on without you." And she said, "Franny, you have years left in your life. I want you to get on with it." And at the end of the day, and then, this is also a little bit of an aside, but we also had a celebration of Joan's life while she was still with us. It was on Zoom because of COVID. Over 100 people came, and she heard them all talk about her and what she meant to them. And at the end of it, she talked back to all of us. And she said, "I'm 86 years old. I've had a wonderful life." She went through some detail about that. "And now I'm ready to go, and I'm comfortable with it. And I appreciate all the support that I'm getting." And so when it was all over, of course I was deeply in grief, but I was also so proud of her. And the whole core group felt the same way. In fact, we were so transformed by this that we too have written a book, and it'll be out by the end of the year, and it's all about Joan. And this book of Lou's is kind of, for me, almost a goal of what you'd like to have happen. But this book is much more fuller, and it explores the different alternatives much more broadly than ours does. And the two of them together, I think, are dynamite.
Now, I couldn't imagine ending on a better note than that. And more to the point, I do want to open up and give Priya a chance to go around with the microphone and give you all a chance to ask some of the questions that might have been evoked by this. There are many things that we can talk about. So if we could see a hand or two, here we go. It begins.
I'm making my way over to you. Just one moment. Go for it.
Thank you.
And would you introduce yourself?
My name is Adele Franks. I live here in Northampton. And I'm wondering what you think of the dementia directive.
There are multiple dementia directives. I think there are 8 of them now that a colleague of mine is reviewing, and he finds them all unsatisfactory. Most of them are focused on people who are in nursing facilities and have pretty much lost the ability to swallow and to eat food, and they are aimed at folk who would find it unacceptable to be spoon-fed at that point. We have a reflex at that point where if you put a spoon in front of somebody's mouth, they will often open their mouth and you can put in the spoonful of food and they can swallow it. And so these dementia directives, a lot of them focus on that not happening. And this is in the face of, if you will, a well-meaning staff that wishes to continue taking care of them and often have taken care of these folk for multiple years. So a great amount of the focus is on that. The other thing just to be aware of is that someone like Joan, someone like Dan Winter, were basically otherwise very physically healthy folk. So Dan didn't have any medications to withdraw or stop. He never got ill enough that anyone would have thought about hospitalizing him or sending him to an intensive care unit. So the standard advanced directives do cover those eventualities, but they're not really geared for the younger, healthier folk. They are more geared for the folk in their 8th and 9th decades, which is when you see most of the dementing illnesses. Do you want to speak to anything further on this?
I think what people are trying to get is a measure of control and to be able to live longer so that you don't have to have full faculty to carry out voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. You just have to have enough faculty to say, yes, I'm enjoying my life. And at some point, you can draw the line in this directive theoretically and say, when I don't know who my wife is, when I don't know who my son is, please stop feeding me at that point. And there's different levels of feeding. We won't need to get into it, but the advanced directive for dementia is all theoretical right now, and it needs to go through, I'm sure, legal challenges, and it's going to be quite a challenge. And yet there's so many people that have dementia that it's a big force to deal with, and I'm sure we're going to see it in the next 10 years.
We also heard that Joan had a recording made, and that can be a very powerful alternative or supplement to the written dementia directives, especially if you're thinking about the nursing home folk who are inclined to try to do more to prolong your life. To hear the voice, to see the face of the person saying, hey, this is who I am, and please do it my way.
Okay. Hi, having read Lou's book, one of the things that's so striking, Fran, when you talk about Joan, is the amount of family support that Joan had in terms of VSED. And I think Dan Winter encountered a great deal of family conflict around his choice, which was not to do VSED initially. And I wonder if you could talk about the kinds of family conflicts that you have encountered around stopping and deciding to die.
That was Joan Berzoff, my wife. And I did not plant that question. In Dan's case, let me say that his husband, who I mentioned, I also interviewed all along at different times from when I was speaking with Dan. John was entirely supportive. He was, in fact, like a carbon copy of you, Franny, in terms of the amount of support. Dan had 17 family members on his email list of people who he loved and adored, and some of them, unfortunately, at the end, when he selected the date that he was going to end his life, some of them told him very clearly that they wanted nothing more to do with him. They could not agree with it. And why couldn't they agree with it? I would only be sort of hypothesizing, but this was a devout establishment Catholic family, and those are factors that weighed in. It certainly wasn't done to hurt him. They were expressing their love in their particular way, but I can tell you it was painful for him to experience, and even secondarily for me to hear about it. It was heartbreaking. I am curious whether any of Joan's family pushed back or had different opinions on this.
Not really. I mean, it was the inside-outside thing for Joan's family. When they first heard about, when Joan first said to them, "I'm going to do voluntarily stopping," they were outraged. They said, "You're going to what? That has to be awful." It was really the same response that I had. And when they were brought into the inside, when they understood better the range of alternatives, they said, this doesn't seem so bad. And we didn't have competing, how shall I say, values to keep us from doing this. And can I expand just a minute? I think one of the big pervasive questions about all of this is, who owns you? Who owns your body? And you guys can speak to this. I'm out of my lane to do it, but my sense of it is that we've come in the medical field much closer to saying, you get to make those decisions. You, the patient, get to make those decisions. You can reject treatment. If you can do it, you can get up and walk out of the hospital, etc. So a kind of a bodily autonomy. However, some of us have already voted. Some of us are going to soon. One of the big issues on the ballot is who owns your body if you're a woman. And here in Massachusetts, once again, as Jeff has said, medical aid in dying has failed. And so they have a different view of who owns your body. Is it the church? Is it your family? Is it the government? Is it you? Not a settled question, as it turns out.
And Jeff, during your career, you have watched the medical establishment shift positions on this.
Very much so. Myself included. I felt medical aid in dying was something unnecessary. A good hospice or palliative care person should be able to make anybody comfortable. But after you do the work enough years, you go, well, it didn't work for this person. Oh, we didn't quite do it for that person. We still do it for, I'd say 98%, but what are the 2%? What do they get? And they don't get what I think they deserve, which is full comfort, good support. And, you can't get palliative care everywhere. You can't get hospice everywhere, although it's pretty much in most communities. So I think it took me a while to evolve in my practice and medicine in general also. The Mass Medical Society, the AMA, all these organizations, they move like the government. They have to have 20 discussions and things move a little bit year by year. They've gotten to the point of saying, well, we support VSED, we'll be neutral on medical aid in dying, and that's sort of where the thrust of medicine is going now.
Another question? Yes.
Hang on just a moment, coming around with the microphone. And then after this, we have a question from the folks watching the live stream downstairs. Is that you? All right, go for it.
Thank you. I'm just curious about what,
Could
I
you-
mean,
could
I
you
know
state
Fran
your-
and I knew...
could you state your name?
Sorry, my name is Sue, and I'm a friend of Fran's, and I knew Joan. And they had tremendous planning, Fran. I mean, Fran and Joan just planned this thing so well. And one of the things that I think about is, what do you do if you don't have a physician who can support this? Which, right now, I don't. They're not against it, but they have no experience with it. And they're quite young and I think afraid of medical license issues. And I don't know how you do this if you don't have a physician who can support you in this, because it seemed like that was a really important role with Joan and Fran.
Great question. I think there's two steps that are important. We mentioned earlier that you can record yourself, you can do a video, audio mixed recording of yourself, and there are examples of patients who had physicians that said, I'm not supporting that, and then they got more evidence. Well, this has been a long-standing thing, and if you can get to somebody's heart and have them really listen and not panic and react like, you know, they're afraid of their license, they become an insider, much as Fran's talked about. And as soon as they do, they go, well, I think I might be able to help you. I may not know what to do, but hospice knows what to do. The Fisher Home knows a lot about what to do. They have the most experience in the Valley. I've talked to colleagues up and down Western Mass also, and very few hospices have many people, if any, that ask for voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. So that's part of why you don't hear about this in the general press. But I think we do have enough people here that that's the connection. If anybody needs education, reassurance, is this really legal? Where do I stand with this? We're a source of information. I gladly speak to anybody, and so would the staff at Fisher.
I would say, you know, my quick answer to your question is you're up the creek under those circumstances. Yeah. I will tell you that every new physician that I go and see, I will, during the course of that first interview, bring up, I'll ask them actually about this subject. I will introduce it because it ain't coming from them. And I will tell them that I hope that I can turn to you when I need you for something like this. Minimally, one would hope that they would make a referral if it came to that sort of situation. They would have an ethical obligation to do so. But it gets trickier and trickier. Yeah.
Let me just one more comment on that. Think back 25 years. Women gave birth in hospitals. It was pretty bare bones. And then women stood up and said, we want better. All of a sudden, every single hospital in the Valley got a birthing center. And they were competing. Mine's better. Mine has a water bath. Mine. If the demand is there and people are vocal, things happen.
Any questions closer to where Priya is? Yes.
Before we jump into that, there's a question sent in from someone who is watching downstairs in the overflow room. I have a colleague down there. Have you seen examples of people who have started VSED, reconsidered, and then perhaps later tried it again?
I have not. Which is to say, how many people have I seen decide to do VSED? Maybe 20. It's kind of big compared to all my other colleagues, but it's still a pretty small sample size. But I can imagine there will be somebody around the corner who will surprise me just that way, and I'll say, this is really your choice. You can reverse this. That's fine with me. We want to support you. And if they came back later and said, I'm ready now, I would accept that.
And as that subject begins to get spoken about more, there'll be somebody who says, let's do some research. on this and actually come up with some numbers to answer that question. If you wouldn't mind finding, sure.
We did actually at the Fisher home have somebody, about 10 years ago who did start VSED at the Fisher home and wasn't able to, because he was in the Fisher home, there were some smells from the kitchen and it just was a little too much, and he decided to start eating again. And about 2 weeks after that, he stopped completely and he went ahead with it. So he just needed to take a break. And he ate fully for the 2 weeks, and then he said, okay, now I'm ready. And so just a little bit of information. Thank you.
And as long as Priya's on this side of the room.
Hello, go ahead. Thank you. Thank you. I'm Barbara Lucy. I have a question. Hi, Fran. I remember how important timing is, and I wanted to follow up on that again, and how critical it was for Joan and for you that she have the lucidity to be fully deciding. However, things are not always so neat as that, so that someone could decide, if this is the scenario I'm presented with, that's what I would like to do. But then something can happen that takes away their ability to make that decision in the moment. I went through something like that with my sister, and she luckily had stated, and I had written down word for word on her most form, if this happens, I would like not to be fed, and I would like to have no artificial support besides palliative. So in her own words, she said that. So we were able to support her through, she was actually not able to eat or drink on her own volition at that point anyway, but we were able to keep her from being fed and being offered food. So there's a lot of gray area, especially where dementia is involved. She had had a couple of strokes, and that's what kind of pushed her further into the dementia quickly. So I think there's no substitute for the kinds of things you've been talking about, like having a recording, which would have been even stronger for us to play to her. But sometimes you just have to go with what this person that you love has told you they want and try to find a way to support that. I would be curious to hear what you all think about that issue of timing.
There's, by the way, a wonderfully clever expression that's used, particularly in Canada. They call it either 5 minutes to midnight or 10 minutes to midnight, and it comes from the Cinderella story, where, as you remember, she's told that she better get out of the ball before the clock strikes midnight. And the same is used now, that phrase is used to talk about exactly what you're describing, which is in the course of this progressive disease in which you can't necessarily track down its trajectory, how fast you're going to be losing it. If you're going to do something like VSED, you got to do it before that clock strikes midnight. You got to do it at the 5 minutes of or the 10 minutes of. And finding that time is tough, and there will be people who don't make it, where the clock does chime and the coach turns back into a pumpkin. Did you want to say something as well?
Yeah, I could add a little something to that. I think this is the most difficult thing. I think trying to identify your window is the hardest thing of all. It was very hard for us. At one point, we came back from Maine at the end of the summer, and Joan said, "Okay, Franny, I'm going to start VSED right after my birthday in September." And without thinking, I said, "Oh no, Joan, no, it's way too soon." And then I backed myself up and said, "Fran, what are you doing? Are you going to cause her to miss her window?" So then I said to her, you have to go talk to the doctor. You and the doctor have to work this out. I'm going to remove myself from this. And that's what they did. They worked it out. But it was clear to us all along that you do have to give up some good days in order to fend off many, many more bad days. And it's the hardest thing, the very hardest thing.
For Dan, the answer to when came when he took his dog, as he did every day, to the neighborhood park, and suddenly time stopped and he didn't know where he was. And he realized when suddenly time restarted and he knew where he was and could get back home, that this was the marker for him. And it's different, going to be different for each individual, but as Franny is suggesting, you got to work from that individual and what they have to say. Priya.
Do one over here and then jump over on that side.
I just wanted to comment to this because this is really hard when you have somebody who makes this decision with lucidity, and then what's the point in which you decide what's the date. What appears more often to me is that the diagnosis isn't made while the person still has capacity. And that feels to me like a big gray area is how is this diagnosis getting made early enough so somebody can make some decisions about their life, because most of the time I see it's made somewhat by fear, it gets held off, but also by physicians, nurse practitioners. We don't know how to diagnose it, so we send it on and we roll it over, and people don't get a decision enough to even have fear and then work on it.
You know, I'm glad you bring up diagnosis. That's one of the things that's going to be changing for the dementias within the next months or couple of years. Until now, it's been a phenomenology type of diagnosis. Some psychological test is given to confirm one way or another how badly a person's memory and cognition is. But we are well on the way now to blood tests. We are well on the way to glucose PET scans. We are well on the way to finding some physical things that we're going to be able to point and use to make the diagnosis. And that will help. More questions, Priya?
Thank you.
Name your name.
Oh, I'm Norma Akamatsu, and I'm a clinical social worker psychotherapist. And I have a slightly different question about the celebration of life. Fortuitously, I organized a gathering for my husband 5 weeks before he died. And it was very meaningful, certainly for him, for me, and for the 50 people at the meeting house at the Lathrop community where my mother was living. I just wondered if that's something that is commonly done. And coincidentally, he had just been told he was entering the phase of palliative care. So things just kind of fell into place. But I just wonder if it's something that is suggested to people.
Well, it sounds great to me. I don't see it with most people. But we're talking about people that have determination, forethought, planning. They have chutzpah. That sounds great. Like, let's talk about my life. Let's celebrate my life. I think it's a thing to suggest to somebody when they're starting to go down this road.
Was it Tom Sawyer or Huck Finn in which the boys were thought by the community to have died, and they crept into their service in which people were extolling how wonderful these two young gentlemen were? I mean, I'd read that, but it is astonishing to experience it in real life with real people. Getting back to what I started with, what's a good death? My God, to be able to be celebrated before you're in the coffin is among many people's ideals of what a good death would be.
I'm Eva Fürst. I am running workshops on end of life, and I have technical questions. It's wonderful to have hospice when you do reset, but don't you have like a 6 months life expectancy before you can get accepted by hospice? So what do you do, say, if you have early onset Alzheimer, you want to do this, but you don't have any support from hospice? I understand you can probably get a palliative care doctor to help you out, but there's a little bit of a gap here. Can you explain that a little bit?
Glad to, Eva. And your mic wasn't working at first. That's Eva Fürst. She has a website and runs support groups in town about these kind of issues. So the way we usually work is to say, are you in the last 6 months of life? If so, what's the diagnosis? And Medicare, if that's your insurance company, is very happy and everything goes smoothly. If you don't have a 6-month prognosis, and Lee Hawkins, one of the first people I met, did not. She just had advanced arthritis and frailty, but she said clearly, I'm going to fall, I'm going to break something, I'll be in the hospital, and I'm going to refuse surgery, and I will die within days to weeks. I said, yes, you would. And she said, furthermore, therefore, I'm going to stop eating and drinking at my own choice time. And as soon as she said yes to that, she has a less than 6-month prognosis. It was not a problem for me to, in legal sense or morally, to say, yes, you are hospice appropriate, and admit her. So, and it hasn't gone in front of, some judge, but I would gladly get up in front of a judge and have that conversation.
Go for it.
Yes, my name is Jim, and I had a cognitive test when I was 75. And I was curious if you recommend periodically doing this just to gauge your relative cognitive abilities.
That's a real tough question. I'm going to bounce back to you. Are you very interested in checking again? He said I could be persuaded. So you have some interest. I think that's what it's going to get down to for each person. If you're going, I've noticed a couple of changes, how much objectively would somebody pick up on a cognitive test? I would mention that cognitive testing is not 5 minutes or 30 minutes. It's a whole day. It's grueling. At the end of it, you're just worn out. So you have to know it's a big deal. And it costs out of pocket usually money also. So I don't tell people I think it's a good thing to do, but there are people that do want to do it, but I think only a few. What's your experience?
Well, again, I think that medicine is moving along, and that some of these physical tests that are right around the corner are going to be very helpful, and maybe you have the choice between having some blood drawn versus spending a day with a neuropsychologist. I think many folk are going to go with the former.
So I became interested in this, especially after my mother was quite ill, and for the last year of her life said she didn't want to live, and could we help her die? And we didn't feel like we could at that point. She would have had to make that decision, and anyway, it was very complicated, and my father was still alive. And watching the two of them go through what they did, it made me want to really get clear about this for myself. And I've been going to webinars on the Hemlock Society of San Diego has had wonderful programs where they've had people who have made these choices talk about them and share their stories. And I think in some places it's called Compassion and Choices. instead of Hemlock Society. And I just wanted to hear if you feel like that's a useful resource to help people be able to hear more stories and find out maybe there are more resources to help you make a plan.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Yes, there are resources out there. There are organizations that have made it their goal to try to be available to people, to let them know what other people's experiences have been like. So Compassion and Choices is certainly one of them. I'm thrilled that you mentioned the Hemlock Society of San Diego. I've been invited to speak to them sometime next year. They're an amazing organization, and they do post, as you say, interviews and videos with people. Another one, a more recent organization, is the Completed Life Initiative, which, again, is interested in educating people and answering their questions, so that if you do, in fact, have some particular concern that you want to take up, write to them. They have people who are knowledgeable. And I did want to bring up the Final Exit Network, which, yes, we get upset and we drop things when that happens. One of the self-admittedly more radical organizations, which actually provides education and emotional support to people who want to foreshorten their lives, and have a group of volunteers that have been trained and will come to people's homes if they have reached a certain point. And they have a medical team that will, in the same way that the Swiss end-of-life programs will receive information to sort of support why a person wants to end their life. They have a team that will respond to that and will select volunteers to come and help folk. Dan had looked into them and decided it was not his cup of tea. But for many people, it is, and it's one more resource and one that doesn't get spoken about. So the Final Exit Network would be the one that I just mentioned. Compassion and Choices, I would say, has become the strongest, most important lobbying group that is helping to try to pass laws. And they were very involved in our state and have been each time that we've had the medical aid and dying bills put before us.
So that bell was the sign that the library is soon to close. So if it's okay with you all, we might wrap up, and then the doctors, if you might want to share any contact info or ways that folks can share their questions with you moving forward, that would be grand. Thank you.
Okay. Ladies first. What am I doing? Wrapping up. Wrap up.
I am very grateful to these gentlemen for including me tonight. I love being able to talk about Joan, and I love actually being able to talk about your book. So thanks.
I'm going to defer to what Fran said. That was beautiful. We're here with lots of information. You can contact me and other people, Susan, other nurses that work there, at Hospice of the Fisher Home in Amherst. And I'll be able to share email or something if anybody wants to come up.
And I've been extraordinarily moved to share this table with the two of you. And I really have nothing more to say other than that this turnout makes me proud once again to be living in Northampton, where people come out on an evening to have such talks. So give yourselves a hand.
Thank you all for joining us. Please be careful on your way out. Have a great evening.